Okay. Thanks for your patience while I got set up and everything figured out timing-wise. So good discussion from the Nova meeting this morning. Thank you for showing up down there. Sorry, I forgot to remind people about that last night to be there, but I think we got everybody there. So let's kick off things for the next hour and 15 minutes before lunch. And are you prepared, Ellen, since I just threw you on the schedule to talk about the edge computing outcomes?
So really the purpose of all of this is just to spur discussion within the Cinder community. There was an all-day session discussing edge in general on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And I think anybody that attended the session, some of the frustration was that edge can mean so many different things to so many different people, so many possible use cases. But there was a guy there who, he's not from Verizon, but was able to speak in detail about some of Verizon's deployment plans. And my takeaway was it sort of solidified the discussion a little bit. At least we had a specific target deployment for what some big user of edge thinks edge means to them. But really, my question to us is, where do we want to fit in? There's questions about, where the various storage may be deployed in an edge deployment, but where do the Cinder storage services want to run? So I really just wanted to, drag us back to the discussion in light of what, sort of came out of Tuesday's meeting. There's nothing concrete that we necessarily need to react to, but I think we just need to be sure that, we're aware of what these edge discussions are so that we're not in a completely reactive mode. One of the things that the Verizon deployment seemed to talk about was this notion of a near edge and a far edge. And depending upon how many far edges you want to deploy and what type of persistent storage they want there, where do they imagine the Cinder services running? But you get into issues where when you want to deploy yet another far edge, if each one of these far edge sites has more storage, then would that represent from a Cinder volume perspective yet another back end? And so what do we need to do to avoid situations where you've got one Cinder volume service running with 100 storage backends, maybe more, because when they talk about deploying all these far remote sites, who knows what scale they have in mind. So my goal here was really just raise awareness and get us talking about it, because it's not a topic that we can avoid. That's all I have to start.
Did anybody else go to the edge sessions? I went to it a little bit too, and I was a little surprised that the discussion seemed to have gone beyond what is edge to how do we get Keystone to scale to that level, that kind of thing. It sounded like when I was there, they were talking more about implementation details to some extent.
Well, at one point, one of the O guys, Steve Hardy, said, what we really need here is a picture. And I honestly can't remember if the discussion took place in the edge session or a corresponding O session, because the O people are, very interested in how we're going to deploy these scenarios. But that's what then led to, we're all literally grouped around a one of those type of whiteboard, small sheets of paper, and the guy was just listing out what services he thought was going to be running where.
So, did it sound like customers were wanting to have storage, to have Cinder at the edge?
Yes, what we keep hearing is that a lot of their current deployments are all ephemeral, but they clearly want storage. So
Okay.
it's coming.
Do you have any specific use cases for Cinder edge clouds?
Well, if you read what the edge groups are doing is they've got like dozens of possible use cases, but a lot of them haven't been flushed out yet. So there were a lot of, present company included, in the room kind of frustrated with the discussions because they kept talking about, very broad, grandiose schemes and dozens of use cases that cover the universe of possibilities. And it really took a while before we could focus a discussion on something a little bit more specific and concrete. And it just happened to be this person who, again, they weren't from Verizon, but I understand that they work with Verizon. And so that was the focus.
I don't know what to do when we start talking about the edge other than start drawing on the whiteboard.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. I'm trying to see my head, but not seeing.
Okay, so if we've got a traditional data center, we've got Nova, Glance, Cinder, Neutron, running here doing all their stuff, right? And then,
Keystone?
yes, thank you. I don't need the full list, I just wanted to get that, but Keystone is obviously an important one. So these edge environments, so we're talking about at a tower or something like that.
Something like that, right?
So it sounds like they haven't considered Cinder a lot yet. They want Keystone out here, having bi-directional discussion here to keep authentication in place.
I don't think they have Keystone up there.
I think Keystone usually is a central part.
Right.
Okay,
What they want out there is kind of a center,
okay.
well, compute deploy.
Yeah, their
Computes.
starting point is we want computes at the edge.
Okay.
And those computes are all worried about what sort of images they're going to be running. So there's a lot of talk, from Lance, and then almost as oh yeah, we'll probably want persistent storage. So
Okay.
that's why they haven't talked that much about Cinder. It's almost sort of like a afterthought. Oh yeah, of course we're going to want some persistent storage.
Okay. So they're just running Nova Compute out here and it's still managed by the central data center?
Yes.
Okay. And they're gonna have Glance
Well, Glance may actually be here.
still back there?
Right.
Okay.
Which wouldn't make any much sense because you're going to have to transfer a lot of images through the wire, which is not always reliable.
They're talking about having some kind of local repository that the Glance
Yeah,
services.
that's how Glance works, but
I remember you said there will be several control centers in the edge scenario. So I think Keystone also inside the edge.
Yeah, there was,
There will be data synchronized between several different edge centers.
that was one of the discussions I
Yeah.
had. But I think the question is, the question we're trying to get to is what would we put here?
I think
Would it just be a CVol instance then that talks to some sort of local storage?
One of the use cases was a hyper-converged, where they're gonna put Nova Compute and a small sub-cluster.
Okay.
So yes, the physical storage would be local. And that's one of the models that was discussed. So, you know, API and scheduler would be back in DC. And each one of these edges might be an availability zone.
It's very dependent on use cases because I know some proposed architecture for edge clouds, mostly from ETSI organization, that they prefer to use edge clouds. They will be not could work offline without DC.
Yes,
So they need everything, and it's Fidelity Stone or something like it. Not only availability zone.
In this case, the reason why they accept the compromise that if you lose the connection to the central, you cannot do attach or detach
Yes,
or things
and
like that.
It's not
That-
acceptable.
They are, in some cases, they are okay with that. Because the number of times they create instance and they delete them is small. They don't, it's not a high frequency operation they do. They just have the instances and they keep running.
Okay.
So in that case, this scenario is okay, but like we were saying, there are other scenarios where you actually want all the volume services, all the senior services on the edge, because you are creating and deleting instances, attaching
they want them
volumes.
autonomous, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
different use case.
I agree.
But they want, generally, they're going to want to be running everything from a central data center.
Controlled from, yeah.
So the API and scheduler pieces all run back there, and then treat these as availability zones.
That's one of the scenarios they are talking about, where they can accept that you can, there will be times you cannot attach volumes or detach them.
Okay.
But the ones you have will work, because you have.
They're local.
Yeah, once they're up and running, they can run autonomously.
I assume they're not looking to have remote storage. That seems like that would be ridiculous.
I don't think that came up, yeah.
Right. So is there anything that we would need to support this right now?
Well, they want the cinder volume service at the edge to have some HA properties. Triple O typically supports that using a pacemaker cluster.
Okay.
But then that's a non-starter for these edge deployments if they're talking about HA. I'm sorry, if they're talking about HCI. So for architectural reasons, they can't run a pacemaker cluster to make cinder volume HA. Which then moves us into drumroll active-active. And that's how high availability could be provided.
So then what this turns into,
Pacemaker.
So if you got pacemaker already, you can do pretty easy active passive HA.
Right, but if they're running it on a hyper-converged node, if pacemaker fences a node, it'll take away a third of your subcluster, and all the rebalancing that would happen would be a nightmare. So that's why they ruled out pacemaker.
so So if we zoom in on AZ2 here, so let's say we've got a 3-node Ceph cluster. With hyperconverged C-ball and compute. On each of them. We've got the high availability for cinder volume. And we've got the high availability for the storage through Ceph with replication. If we have active working back in the scheduler with what we're working at with JPipes, we've got the scheduler covered. If we lose this connection, the data connection stays up here, we just can't do control level changes. So then we're good here once we have the active working.
As long as that node doesn't, as long as the node doesn't restart and without a connection. Because when it will restart, you will want to recreate the RDD connections and you will not have the OS-free temporary file for the Ceph credentials, I think. Or that's no, probably Nova stores that. That's Nova recall Cinder to do so if you restart a node, Nova already has the connection information. So in theory, it should not need to recall Cinder, but I don't know if they do. If they do, this scenario has a weak point, which is when you restart.
Okay.
If they don't call it and they use whatever they have, we're good.
Because nothing would have changed here, it can't.
Yep.
Okay.
And they don't need to call Cinder, basically. They can use the connection information. Oh, but they no longer have the connection information. Now it's stored in Cinder, right? In the attachment.
Yeah.
So they would probably call it every time. If we started without connection to a node, to the central. Yep, that would happen. We would have to check all the code, but I think that would be a problem.
So this is a restart when the WAN's down.
I don't know if that is also a compromise they are willing to accept or not.
That was the impression I got.
No, I mean, because they accepted the one where you cannot create new instances. But if one of your nodes reboots, you may want the instances that were running there to come back up and keep running, right?
Yeah,
Which is a different scenario from not being able to do it.
I understand. Obviously, I can't speak for them, but the sense that I got was that they would kind of consider those two cases similar enough. Okay, when the WAN's down, you got limitations. If they are talking about these far edge nodes being, like in cell towers, and, one of the other guys there was talking at length about the physical constraints they have, how many U's of rack space they have, how much power they have, and that's based on, a requirement for being able to run for 48 hours on diesel backup. But there's limitations on the amount of diesel fuel that you're allowed to store at a site before it's considered, an explosion, potential. So they've got constraints all over the place. And I almost got the sense that some of these far edge nodes were treated as cattle. Like, okay, one goes down, yep, Somebody's gonna go back and fill up the diesel tank again.
We've gone to the whiteboard. That's,
Nice.
so,
I can also share slides that will change, but it has some edge architecture diagram. Oh, on it.
sure.
Sorry, I
So-
just expected the session to happen at like 4.
I'm sorry, we pushed
Sorry.
it up because Sean could be here for other stuff.
Okay,
and I didn't mean to make you work
Okay.
here.
I was just 2 floors. It's fine. I need exercise.
Okay.
I will find the link.
So kind of where we're at right now is we're just trying to like grok what an edge instance would look like with Cinder in it, kind of. And we're assuming that we would probably have a hyper-converged Ceph type setup with Cinder volume running there and it all being managed from the data center. So that's about how far we've gotten in thinking about implications of losing WAN connection and what have you. So here's a stupid question, but if the WAN goes down, the tower's not going to be functional anyway, right?
Right.
So, so, but they want it functional when it comes back up. And if these guys go down and lose their disks, that's badness. Right? Lose their
Sure.
attachments.
Yeah.
So say you have a catastrophic event that knocks out the WAN connection, takes power out, earthquake or fire or whatever. And so we lose this connection, these guys go down. Chances are the power's gonna come back up first before the network, theoretically. These guys are gonna try to reboot and go back to life and phone home and then vomit, which we don't want.
Jacob, is there different use cases? Some we got requests from our customers. So if edge cloud, if connection between edge cloud and data center it drops, so edge cloud could provide some services to clients, maybe some caching, but it should be operatable without connectivity.
So there's also the use case where the WAN was down, but they still want customers to have access here.
Different use case, but sometimes it's required.
You can keep on talking.
The master's at work, I'm out of the way now.
I think we were just kind of like describing the far edge here. I told them about edge and far edge.
Well, so with the what we drew Tuesday afternoon, we had the main DC, edge side, and far edge. So we have like I don't know, 3-tier architecture.
Yeah,
And,
this is the middle one.
And the 2 cases are like, so whether you have everything in the main DC and then, you have better management and orchestration stuff, but if you lose the connection here, then oh well. Or whether you have, in case of you lose the connection here, you have the control plane stuff on the edge side so it can still operate. These were like the 2 main.
Well, I remember that. I mean, so Ilko and I were both there when Verizon guy was talking. But in this diagram, this is the edge and those are the far edge. So you drew it one more layer to the right.
Far edge.
There's
Yeah,
one
although-
more main DC that they talked about here.
Yeah, in that sense, so, but
So,
with the 3-layer stuff, basically the difference is that, where all the control plane services are and that it, gives different requirements to services.
so what happens if you've got, so if this is the edge and you've got another DC here with all the control plane services running, how does that work?
Well, I think each DC1 will have its own set of far edges, and DC2 will have its set of far edges.
Okay, so this
These might
control
be like
plane,
regions, yeah, those are.
So in the main DC, in this sense, what we had is like federated keystone and
Right.
France API and those
Right.
things. And you also have to figure out how you have an aggregated view of the control plane services on the edge sites, basically, which is a headache currently, and we don't have that solved. But, yeah,
They
but
could still call them as regions, make them regions, and they could, or they want to, oh yeah, they probably want to see it all.
so in the case where we had control plane services in the main DC, I think we said that these things would be like NOAA cells or stuff like that. We didn't really hash out all the details, but yeah. Region cells, whatever applies.
And another thing I think Alan mentioned yesterday is that when we start doing Cinder active on the edge node, and we start increasing the edge node, suddenly the number of services, the Cinder services that will appear in our database for the scheduler and everything, it's going to be big. Because if we just have 3 Cinder volume services on the edge and we have 80, we end up with 240 Cinder service entries, which I don't think anybody has actually tested.
what could possibly go wrong?
So that's,
Yeah, so they would
One of the
often
concerns.
say like, 1, 2, N. What's N? And they all kind of, well, so,
I think we had like 10 here and I don't know, hundreds here.
yeah, that's where
10
that's
times
where.
hundreds.
So some of that might be like the twinkle in their eye, but you get a sense of what they're looking for.
and then we have to check if this is a problem for mostly our scheduler or things like that, because suddenly a table that usually has, 10 entries could have 1,000. Yep, yeah, exactly. So that's something we
That's why
have.
we're here.
So it's not as much right now, besides the active working. I don't think there is much request for new features in Cinder. It's
Okay.
basically just making sure that what we have scales and works in the different scenarios. Okay. It's not clear.
Imagine managing.
I think actually in the Verizon case, all the control plane stuff is here and it's like Nova computes and things like that because they don't care that much about if the network connection, stops existing here. They would just operate with what they have, like not spinning up new instances, adding new users to Keystone and shit like that.
Yeah,
So
That's the scenario we're running just with the DC and the edge. That's the one we are working, which seemed the most specific one that they had. Like,
I think that was the immediate need, and then there are some use cases in discussion that would need okay, if the connection, dies here, I still want to be able to operate like normally and then sync back with the main DC, having the aggregated view and stuff, but that also brings up a lot of questions for other, few other services as well, like Nova and, how do I figure out all the Nova services and the status of them and what's up? And just like getting that aggregated view is really not something that we would have gotten with anywhere. So, yeah, federated keystone for that case when we have control planes here.
So this would become the master authentication point.
Well, so you have, I think in that case, we basically had an identity provider, which either sits here or you're basically having a distributed identity provider, and then it basically gives you still a chance to operate here with the local Keystone instances as much as I understand, but there are a few, bugs and missing things to hash out for that beachhead users and things like that in Keystone, but that's something which is kind of in flight as I understand it. So the Keystone part is kind of covered. We talked about caching images and image metadata, because without metadata, you cannot really operate here, and if the metadata is only here, then we're screwed. And then, yes, we drew volumes here, and that's where we got the cinder. Basically. I don't know how much we talked about, like how cinder works in like the edge or edge scenario, like what service it's where. I
Well,
don't think we know.
We're assuming that you'd have C-ball out there, talking back to the API and scheduler.
Mhm.
Because really that's all you need on the far edge. And we would need active-active. To run it hyper-converged and have HA, we would need to be able to run it active-active, which we're very close to doing. The problem may be if the cluster restarts without a connection to the data center, being able to remount the volume without access back to Cinder. So that's
Right,
something
would
we
it, would
need
it,
to look
would it
at.
make sense to look at what Glance is doing to put cache and persist information locally at the edge, and perhaps have Nova do something similar with the connection info?
What they were talking about, if I remember correctly, was basically having glance services there, replicate the data, the metadata, and then just make Nova point directly to that glance in the same edge. So it's
not really related. The only
different.
relation is that it's information that Nova needs to restart, right? So connection info is information that Nova needs to restart.
Which is
So
something we
maybe
just
Nova needs
took
to
out from
cache
Nova.
it at the edge and persist it at the edge so that it can restart.
I don't see Nova going that way because we just removed that information from Nova.
I
recently.
understand that you
So they
removed it.
probably will say, just install Cinder there and cache it in Cinder or something like that.
Okay, so change the architecture.
I think they are more likely to go that way than caching this information themselves. But maybe they won't, and they will be willing to cache it.
In this case, Nova will require to implement no compute to Cinder volume communication without scheduler, without Cinder API. It's totally different case.
I'm not following.
Because on edge cloud, if we miss communication with our control plane, so Nova should be able to communicate to Cinder volume directly.
It doesn't help because Cinder volume doesn't even have the database.
Yes,
So it's no
Yeah.
use.
yes.
But, I mean, trying to deploy Cinder volume in the database and everything at each edge node seems,
They did not
Exactly.
do that.
yeah,
That's
that's too
what
heavy
I'm saying.
weight.
So Nova may say that, but it doesn't seem to be a viable architecture, right?
Why not?
Well, how is Nova gonna cache it though? I had a request for the whiteboard and you wouldn't move, so
Well, I didn't know that the camera was there.
I was trying to be polite. Okay, here, we'll switch.
If the whole database is back there on the restart, Nova cannot tell even what instances and what needs to be connected. So it wouldn't be the single problem. Like Nova couldn't do anything, right?
Everything's lost.
Yeah, no, it's like Nova wouldn't even bother to call Cinder.
Right.
Because it
Because
would
no one
go,
call it for.
yeah, because
Oh,
it
okay.
doesn't know which volume needs to be reattached to those instances. So how would Nova solve that problem?
Okay.
Okay, so they need to solve that problem first before we can even,
Before they even begin to ask us. But we probably want to be in that conversation to figure out how we interact for the reattachment.
We
Build a process
definitely
now.
didn't get that far with the edge cases of the
Right.
edge cases. Like, we only got that far that what if the connection is lost between the main DC and those regional, I don't know, edge DCs in this context. But like what happens if the services restart, or if you also lose power and then the power comes back and you still don't have connection, like you didn't go that.
All right.
Okay.
So with the Nova guys and like basically everyone in the room, we only got that far that, drawing up an architecture like this and put services, or well, different parts of the services to different parts of the architecture kind of makes sense in case you need control here or if you don't need control here. So we kind of played with the services for those two scenarios and figuring out the details like what happens if this restarts and you don't have the connection. That's going to be a discussion for a later time, I think. I don't think that we have capacity to do all these things out.
It'll keep us employed for a while, right?
Hey Jay, are you gonna have enough physical resources on the cell tower to do all this?
Not
Because,
really.
we sell a little Dell Edge device that's hardened, but it's not a big machine, right? Even if you had two, you haven't got to the actual workload that Verizon or their client wants to run yet. You may have used up all the resources on the server to provision for that.
Yeah, this is why I wanted to put the
somewhere.
far edge out there because that's basically the cell tower or something like that.
But if they're gonna be running a Ceph cluster, they gotta have something out there.
But,
Is it where
We
you
want-
run the stuff?
we're thinking data center servers as
ridiculous
opposed
to
to edge
Run it
servers.
over the wire.
I mean, if you're resource constrained, then you are resource
It
constrained.
depends on what you are using the volumes for. It may not be, in some cases, I've heard it's basically to log stuff. So maybe you're not writing that much data. but
There's
you
like
want
call
it
data
versus-
records and stuff like that.
Yeah, so you compress it, send it. It's not a lot of bandwidth that you need.
Yeah.
In other cases, you will want it there. So I guess it will
We only
depend.
explored the mobile edge use case basically on Tuesday, but there are a ton of other things that we haven't gotten there yet. But yes, in some cases, so when we drew the volume here, that was, some local disk if we have it kind of thing, but it really depends on the actual use case and you will not always have the Ceph cluster over there.
So in the case that you don't have the Ceph cluster, then you would have some sort of SAN back here
Maybe.
with a CVOL, but we'd still have CVOL processes on multiple small edge boxes, right?
Well, you would need one if there was one central SAN.
Well,
Oh.
Because CVOL would run there,
Why would it?
well, that's where your SAN is.
Oh, I suppose.
and are you thinking containers for this stuff? Because if you're gonna spin up a dozen VMs, you're wasting a lot of resources.
Well, they wouldn't have to run in VMs. I mean, it's gonna be on bare metal, right?
I guess the question is, do you need that kind of stuff? Because theoretically, the application that the Verizon client is trying to run is running on the same box. I'm not gonna have a stack of servers.
Right.
This is what we had on the flip chart thing. The persistent storage, something tiny that we have on the far edge and it's control plane stuff on the PC here. But we didn't go into Cinder details. Because we basically said that, yeah, we even need to talk to the Cinder team for that. Because they were the smart guys. We were the daydream guys. But in our case, the far edge was always small. Like, small footprint, not too much resources, not too many resources.
Oh, well, and if it's a SAN back here, HA at the edge doesn't matter anyway, because once it goes down, they're losing their data anyway. which case this isn't that much different than just having a remote compute then. Which,
For us,
which is fine. So the only point we get concerned is when we start having volume processes at the edge, far edge.
I think the only thing is when you active, we need to check what happens on our scheduler when we have 200, 300 services in there.
what could possibly go wrong?
Well, considering that we are
work pretty good. We tested Cinder's scheduler with about 800 LVM nodes. And it works well.
Excellent.
Yeah, but we are also going to change how the scheduler works, accessing the database. So that changes completely everything, because we were, in those cases, all the data was in RAM to make the decision. Now we're going to the database, or we will be going. So we have to evaluate the performance impact. But it is good to know that in memory works fine with 800.
And again, in their use case, they weren't going to be constantly spinning up new instances. You know.
Yeah, but we still have to figure out our
Oh,
limits.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they may not be constantly doing it, but they may be doing it in bursts.
Oh, right.
That is
Exactly.
cool.
Yeah.
So sounds a lot.
James is currently working on a document just to basically capture what we talked about Tuesday afternoon. So I guess based on that, we can also just follow up on different items such as Cinder, pictures for you guys, or I can see whether he can come over to the room. Probably it's easier if we have an overall overview document first and then see for items for the details. I don't know your bandwidth for the upcoming cycle and so forth, and how much anything that we got to hear affect things that you're working on right now.
Well, it reaffirms some of the things we're working on,
Okay.
which is good. And that with J-Pipes is helping us with that to get the scheduler set up to handle this kind of environment.
Okay, that sounds good.
But I think other words, as long as we're not running the volume processes at the far edge, we have less to worry about. Things won't get interesting until Nova starts figuring out how to recover from a failure without connection back to the data center. That's where the work will get hard.
Do we know where that might fit in Verizon's wants?
That's a good question.
They talked about being out in the desert a lot yesterday.
Yeah. I don't know. For that, we need to ask those guys who actually deploy these things and run them. So that's a question for James. I can't really answer it for him. But I can again thinking that's something that you think that
It'd be good to take his temperature, just, where is it in his list of priorities? Is it a must-have, or, oh, don't worry about that for now, or?
So to underscore my point, I'm looking at the biggest Dell gateway, 512 gigs of hard drive, 8 gigs of memory, and that's the average what you would have in a box on a cell tower. There might be other ones competitively that are bigger, but it's not a lot.
I'm sure Lenovo can beat that.
Do you hear anything from NetApp? Here.
Well, now that they're partnered with us.
Anyway, that would be a concern, is trying to spin up all these services that you don't have the resources behind.
Well, I mean, a CVAL process does not take up a lot of memory.
It depends on the driver.
No, I don't think it
Usually
does.
they don't, but
If it's one of those leaky, VMAX drivers, I'm sure it takes up tons.
You need 4 boxes just to run driver.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they actually end up running out at the edge, hardware-wise. Everybody's working on different solutions there. But I mean, to answer, we had one of those edge boxes sitting on a coworker's desk at Lenovo, and we were able to run an entire OpenStack cloud in it. So I think it had 16 gig. I can't remember how much memory it had. It didn't have that much storage. But we could spin up several compute instances in there.
Can you run this infrastructure similar to the one we are drawing? Can you run something similar to that, or only one compute node? Or
I mean, we could have run used it like multiple compute nodes.
but not multiple storage edge boxes.
No, they weren't big enough to fit notable storage in them. They were more suited for compute. And were surprisingly expensive. I wanted to put a cluster together in my house, and they were like $300 each.
I haven't heard a response from him. Maybe they're busy going through ironic stuff or something.
Okay, is there anything else we feel like we should talk about with Edge? Was there more that you wanted to share, Ildiko?
I think they're good for now. And I can take on the action point of making sure that we have an eye on the summary document and stuff like that we come up with, and then just basically take it from there, if that sounds good enough. I mean, we have this edge computing group, and we are trying to focus on use cases, a little bit of overall architecture and requirement stuff, just to have a central place where we basically deal with edge-related things, and then it just boils down to services such as Cinder, and we just plan to address actual requirements and things that are service specific in the actual service, so that we don't come to you guys and just figure it all out. And if you say that this so far kind of confirms a few items that you're already working on, then I guess we're kind of not blocking you either, but we're kind of pointing to similar directions, which I guess could be good enough for now, but
We gotta start there. I think it's a great starting point.
okay, cool.
It's-
Because we don't have too many use cases which would be like running in production already. Like we have the mobile edge, which is kind of an immediate thing to deal with. Mobile edge doesn't have all the requirements, like with the connection loss between main DC and DC items, having the full authority and operating as nothing happened. As I understood James, they don't have that requirement, but some use cases will. So we're just trying to be proactive also. So I think we're kind of okay for now, but trying to keep my ears open and, just point you to information as soon as we have it.
Yeah, I would say, as they start talking more about cinder and volume, please pull me in. And it sounds like Alan, you're
Sure, I'll, yeah.
Yeah, of
Alan
course.
Bishop.
I just want to avoid getting into rabbit holes with things that we assume will happen, but we don't know yet because that just, that doesn't always lead to places. Like, trying to solve problems that don't even exist yet, but we think they will, that's just, I don't think we should do that.
Don't help them create requirements.
Yes,
Yeah.
try our best.
So,
And that's,
Cool.
that's very, very, that's why it's good that we have a close connection with people that are actually trying to do this in their clouds, because it's now, we can see the problems that you're trying to solve. We don't get, we don't lose time trying to solve the other problems that we
Yeah.
don't know if they.
So basically what we came up on Tuesday, we called it minimum viable solution, product, whatever. So just, something that we kind of see we need to deal with, the minimum services and how they might run and the immediate problems. And we basically want to evolve from there. This is basically kind of the best we can do for now. And I also have plans to have at least one forum session on use cases and just trying to find more people who are deploying things that are relevant. And then, just see what comes as input from there. And another thing that we are trying to do in collaboration with other communities is setting up test environments. When we get there, like at OPNFE, they have labs in different geographical locations, so kind of setting up deployments that way and just test out things. So what if, the distance is actually physically there, and then see where we get and stuff like that. So can keep you guys posted when things are moving. Currently, we are doing testing activities with Keystone. That's what we started with, but I would assume that we will just evolve with a fuller architecture when we, succeed with one service and just basically manage to figure out what the heck we want to test, because we are struggling with even that at this point.
cool. Well, thank you for running up here. It was helpful to have you here.
Awesome. I'm glad that I didn't just hijack the discussion and,
No.
drove you into a rabbit hole and then just like, we did. Just kidding.
Mission accomplished.
I think we're looking good, and then we will, just one by one, we'll try to find answers to those questions, and I guess also asking more questions. And then we're together as used to. We've been doing it for long, so.
More Nova Cinder Cross project work.
Yay!
We'll get our Eldico back. Cool. All right. So we got 25 minutes before lunch. You're gone after lunch, right? Okay, so we should get to your topic next, which you put my name on, but
You can.
okay. Okay, so install documentation discussion. We've iterated on this repeatedly with each PTG, but I feel like we're making some progress. So would like to continue to make progress and keep it in people's minds. Go ahead. You have more thoughts on this than I do.
So where we seem to be today is that there's an interest in providing some additional documentation around deployments that incorporate more than just different Linux distributions. So one possibility would be containerized Cinder, for example. Once we get to that, there are some other options which include standalone Cinder. So in effect, I don't think coming up with the documentation is really all that onerous. What's more of a challenge is just figuring out what the team wants to include at that point. So we know we have the Linux OS distribution requirement. I put up a couple of other types of deployment options, as many as 5 here. I'm not sure they're the right ones. So there would be one that would be Keystone only, or a standalone solution, a no-op standalone, which is kind of independent of the rest of OpenStack, Kubernetes containerized block storage service, and this containerization period. So what would help me anyway is just to be able to say, okay, we're going to do these 3. Because the next step actually is to work with the people that have either blogged on this topic or done summit video presentations, et cetera, because there's not really a formal document that says, here's how you do it with Kubernetes, or here's how you do it with containers. So my plan would be to corral whoever wrote those blogs. Like I talked with John Griffith about that. He's happy to work in collaboration. But we need to basically have a roadmap that says we're going to include these things, and then that would give me the ability to move forward with it.
So I think obviously the standalone one is of interest to go forward with. I would put that as.
But what's that mean? I mean, are we talking truly standalone, no auth? Or are we talking, and do we want to break it down more in that regard? Do we just say, here's 3 different iterations of standalone, which is fine with me. So we have a standalone swim lane, and we have a containerization swim lane. That's fine. I'm just wanting clarity.
I think for standalone we means without Nova. But it could contain 2 options with Keystone or with Nova for some Kubernetes deployments. So
Right. So we make standalone and we split that out for no auth and Keystone. That's fine. Makes sense.
I have most of the people looking for standalone, I think they were not thinking about using Keystone. Like what their intention was, what is the minimum number of services I can run to get everything Cinder gives them, which in our case is you're going to remove Keystone, Glance, Nova. For Glance, you just have to make sure that you remove, I think, one of the policies, so you don't allow to, I think it's create volume from image or something like that, because otherwise you get an error and you only see Y in the logs. But I think that's the most common use case. In many cases, I assume they would want that standalone to be containerized, so they can use it in Kubernetes or something like that. And I've also seen people asking about, okay, I have a standalone without authentication. How can I add my authentication here? I've also had questions about that.
Okay. So I think, I mean, it's easy enough to draft up something that would say, you know, we have this kind of core statement about standalone. Obviously, like you said, there's going to be some other limitations, like is this containerized or not? How would you integrate some other sort of authentication mechanism? There may be some, I don't want the scope creep to get too big and complicated, right? But we could even have links to other people's discussions of how that's been handled, if that's what's appropriate. What about containerization though? Because to me, it seems like if we were able to offer a containerized deployment, like Docker type of deployment, most people would start there as opposed to manually installing it on a
The issue would come from the database. You need persistence there. That's where it gets tricky.
You can get persistent database with containers.
Triple O runs Cinder completely containerized.
But we need to be clear what contain related use case we want to cover first, because there are two absolutely different use cases. The first of one, it's containerized Cinder contemplate, and the second one, and when we want to use Cinder as storage provider for Kubernetes.
Cinder is the provider of Kubernetes.
So
What do you mean by that?
to use Cinder avoidance in Kubernetes. This is avoidance.
Okay.
So you're saying you have a Kubernetes environment and you plug Cinder into that to provide storage?
Yes.
You deploy Cinder in a containerized fashion,
Right.
and you use it to provide your PVCs and everything.
So I didn't follow this topic for the last 3 months, I guess, but they, in previous, they did very good job to integrate Cinder into Kubernetes. They got Cinder provider. You can use Cinder with no hours. Like if maybe with Keystone, sure to provide persistent volumes for Kubernetes.
So does that give us 3 versions? So we have the no auth. That one seems clear enough in my head that I know what to do with it. We would have the Cinder as the storage service to Kubernetes, which is kind of a more advanced standalone, right? Because you're plugging it into a completely different orchestration system.
So I think it's the most used use case for standalone Cinder.
It's that's with off or not?
No,
Oh, I'm not sure.
usually without,
Okay.
So, but that
as
makes
far as I
sense.
know.
So I see those two. Am I missing one? I mean, would there be such thing as just a standalone containerized, or not even standalone, just could you deploy using Docker or some other container mechanism?
Yeah, but I think Ivan's point was important, is the most use case for a standalone is Kubernetes.
Right.
So maybe even if there could be cases where they would want a standalone containerized on its own, I don't think the number of cases would justify the time to document
I
it.
guess I'm thinking of where you actually want Cinder to remain as part of OpenStack, but you want to deploy it as containers as opposed to.
And then we have the
Yes,
whole.
but it's not about standalone.
Right.
It's
But
only
then it's
about
still-
containerizing.
You know, if we had a repository of Docker images that basically would just.
Colab.
Colab
Colab
has
does.
that.
There is a project that is basically OpenStack containerized.
So would we, from a documentation perspective, it exists, but we don't talk about it, right? So that's my point.
Like a reference at least saying, this is an option, here is what you get the information to do it.
So that helps. So we would have basically 3 stories to tell them. So the Cola story, Cinder with Kubernetes story, and the standalone story.
And does OpenStack Loki project still alive?
Sorry?
Is OpenStack Loki OCI project is still alive?
I don't know.
So we've got a piece of it in Cinder, and it allows to run Cinder and Docker for development purposes. I don't know if it's a production ready or not, but usually I use it with no hours to test Cinder. Contribute black boxes.
I'm not sure about that one.
Oh, yes, contribute black box.
Oh, okay.
Jay, the other thing we talked about is this would be really hard to do in Garrett out of the gate. Just because you have to figure out where to put it in order to submit what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I'd rather avoid that headache. So you mentioned the possibility of using like a Etherpad or something so that we sketch out these different swim lanes, we get some of the basics of what the content is, and then decide how to plug it into the actual hierarchy, and we'll submit it through Garrett once we're ready to do that. But
Yeah.
I don't want to compose the content in that. It's not the best Word document kind of thing.
You could even use, I'm not against using a Google Doc.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You write it up, you said everybody else only can comment but cannot modify. We can go, add our comments.
I think that would be ideal.
Okay.
So as long as that's fine, because later we'll have to figure out how to actually, graft it into the existing documentation, but the content should be a separate project.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
And I think the last thing, so any suggestions of who to work with on those three? I know Griffith has done some of the work on the standalone stuff, he has a couple of blogs. Is there someone that's written up the Kubernetes solution?
I have somebody that I can point you to that might be able to help, at least as a starting point.
Because I intend to plagiarize the hell out of stuff, so.
Yeah.
I'd like to have their permission. They can even have the byline as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. So the action coming out of this.
So it's been a while since I've used Google Docs, so if I just announce it and then give people, they'll figure out how to log in.
You can just create a document, go to share options, set that anybody can access but only do comments, and you can just share the link and we can just go there.
Good, I think that's all I need.
Rajat was just asking about deployment with Ansible. I think that would maybe be a future work item. I think we want to get to the,
Do you mean OpenStack Ansible?
I don't know. Do you mean OpenStack Ansible, Rajat?
And would that be full OpenStack or only Cinder standalone?
So I was talking about OpenStack Ansible.
Okay.
And were you referring to deploying Cinder standalone with OpenStack Ansible?
Yes, the discussion I thought about Cinder standalone. OpenStack deployment is available with Ansible, but Cinder standalone is not, I guess.
Well, I tried it last year. It was not implemented yet, but it was pretty easy to add ability to deploy a standalone Cinder with OpenStack Ansible. Probably I could find my patches for it if it's still not available.
That could be part of the deploying Cinder standalone story, right?
Yeah.
How to do it with Ansible instead of doing anything manually. That could be an option.
Yes.
Okay.
I
That
mean,
makes sense.
practically speaking, if there's some body of documentation that talks about that, then the goal is really just to assimilate that and place it in. So
So I get you in touch with Amy Marish for that. And she does lots of stuff with Cinder deployment and Ansible and stuff, so.
And the other thing that I was just thinking, when it comes to the Linux OS deployment instructions, it seems a little odd to me that, given that Red Hat, for example, definitely have their version of doing that. It's easy to have theirs and so on and so forth. Why we would want to write something ourselves? And wouldn't we just point the people to those docs which they're maintaining?
I defer to the Red Hat people in the room.
Well, the question is whether we want to be able to install Cinder from pure upstream OpenStack things.
Yeah.
Which I think is.
Yeah, I mean, we get lots of people that want to deploy with Ubuntu or something.
Right.
Because all of the Red Hat centric documentation is going to be consuming our packages, and I think that's not what we want to do here.
No, grant you, I'm just saying, one, if I'm coming in as a user, I would hope that the community documents would at least reference the fact that those instructions exist.
Yeah.
And they kind of don't now. So, part of this whole swim lane thing is there's different ways for you to approach this. One of them is to work with Red Hat, for example, in which case you should go here. Right? Another one would be to deploy it manually on Ubuntu. We'll help you with some documentation on doing that. But make sure that they have an adequate picture of what that landscape looks like and which road they want to go down. Once they do that, we can, in some cases, just hand them off.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for the new user.
And I would hope that the more sophisticated users, in some ways they've matured beyond that, and they're looking at the vendor drivers or things like that. Right?
Can we install standalone Cinder using Red Hat? Most of the things like audio and stuff installs the whole OpenStack.
You can install it standalone. You just tell it to install the basically you have to do it manually. I don't know if with PackStack you could do it, disabling everything else, but manually you can do it. But it's not probably the best.
The thing is, as the Cinder project, it seems like it would be a good thing to have documentation on how to just install Cinder as Cinder without involving distributions and packages and all that stuff. Who the audience is that actually wants to do that is less obvious, I think.
Right.
But it does seem like something that we should at least know how to do.
But I think there is, like, you're referring to installing from directly master or something like
Well,
that?
I don't know. That's what I'm wondering. I mean, maybe the answer is just go use DevStack. I don't know, really, because that might be the answer for how do you just do it for upstreams. So,
But I think most people looking for that documentation would not be looking to use master, right?
what are they looking for?
If I want to learn how to deploy Cinder standalone for my Kubernetes deployment,
Oh, I'm not talking about Kubernetes, or
so
standalone.
they stand, well then,
I wasn't talking about standalone. I was talking about where he started with the just installing Cinder with OpenStack.
we have that documentation, right?
I don't know. Do we?
Install and configure controller node. It tells you to install, I think, the database, then you jam install the
Well, that's the tricky part, though, is if you
OpenStack Cinder using RDO. This is for well.
right, but that was my whole point. Was I was talking about whether we should have one that's not based on RDO's packaging, that's actually just an upstream thing. And I don't know, really. But that's what I had in mind when I was talking about it.
Is there any way we could actually get some perspective in terms of how people, what they actually need and or what they're actually doing? Because it seems, one of the things as an outsider coming in, it doesn't seem like the documentation is that helpful for someone who doesn't really understand OpenStack that well.
Well, I think what people are actually doing is they're going to any of the various distributions and they're starting with their getting started documentation.
Right. So where I started was, and we should help them do that. Because it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And then, treat the person that wants to do the manual install without the distribution aid as the exception. It's certainly one of the possibilities, and I'm not opposed to supporting that, but right now we thrust that in as the primary way of approaching the problem, which I think is probably not very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So maybe that's the first thing we want to do is to find that for each of the distros and say, you probably want to actually start here.
But then you gotta figure out which distros you take and how many of them you want to, and all that good stuff.
Well, right now we've got Red Hat, SUSE, and Ubuntu, which I don't see a need.
But, and you're aligning with all the other projects that are doing it that way. So if you make this change, I would suggest you try to recycle it back, to get everybody to do it.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, if you read the docs, you start off and you're installing Keystone will split out that way.
Yep.
Right? And then you need Keystone before you can install Cinder back for the full, not the standalone case, and, but I mean, they start much earlier than Cinder doing it this way. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying you want to probably not do it just for Cinder.
In terms of framing the question, I think a new user might be saying, not so much, I want to install Cinder so that I can play with Cinder. What they really should be saying is, I want to install OpenStack so I can play with Cinder.
Right.
And the instructions are very muddy if you're trying to do that.
Well, which is why, again, I think to a user who's coming fresh to this, you don't want to send them down the rat hole of installing everything bits and pieces by hand. So I would say, you can point to kind of like the all-in-one type approaches like a dev stack or whatnot. And then beyond that, say if you want a full-blown distribution, then we encourage you to look at Ubuntu and
Kind of like saying, here's all these paved roads, but if you still want to go down the dirt road, here's how you do it. Right? But that's what I would want as a user, don't send me down the dirt road and then have someone later say, hey, there's this great paved road over here.
Why don't you take that over
there? Really fancy.
Okay, so we've hit lunchtime. Did that take care of your questions? Okay, cool. All right, thanks everybody. We'll break for lunch and meet back here a little after 1:30 then. Thanks for the edge discussion, Alan. That was really good.
Good, that was helpful. Yeah, there we go.